The night my wife came home smelling like someone else's cologne, she kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee going cold in my hand, and I remember thinking, that's not my brand. Not the coffee. The kiss. Her name was Diane. We'd been married 11 years. She taught third grade at Riverside Elementary, coached the girls' soccer team on weekends, made the best cornbread in Clover Falls, Tennessee. Everyone loved Diane. I loved Diane. I had loved Diane since the night we met at a friend's 4th of July party, and she argued with me for 45 minutes about whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie. She was wrong, by the way. It absolutely is. Our son Cooper was 9. Our daughter Maisie was 6. I ran a small HVAC company. 3 trucks, 7 employees, nothing fancy, but it kept the lights on and put money in the college fund. I coached Cooper's Little League team on Saturdays. I grilled on Sundays. I was the guy who remembered the neighbors' birthdays and helped the elderly widow 2 doors down carry her groceries. I was, in every possible sense of the word, ordinary. And for a long time, I thought ordinary was enough. The first sign came in February. Diane started going to the gym. I thought nothing of it. She'd talked about getting back into shape since Maisie was born. But then the gym visit started running 2 hours. Then 2.5. Then she'd come home showered, hair still damp, and I'd wonder why a person would shower at the gym when they were just going home to shower again. I didn't ask. That was my mistake. I'm the kind of man who hates confrontation more than he hates being lied to, and that combination, I've learned, is a dangerous thing to be. By April, her phone was always face down. She laughed at texts in another room. She started caring about what she wore to run errands. Little things, things that, on their own, meant nothing. Things that, stacked together, meant everything. His name, I found out later, was Brandon Holt. Brandon was 31 years old. He was a personal trainer at that gym, 6'1", 210 pounds of carefully arranged muscle, the kind of guy who posted shirtless photos with motivational captions and got 1,000 likes from women who should have known better. He drove a black pickup truck with custom rims. He wore shirts one size too small on purpose. I know all of this because by June, he was standing in my driveway. It was a Saturday afternoon. Cooper was at baseball practice. Maisie was at my mother-in-law's house. Diane had told me she was going to help a colleague move. I'd come home early from a job, routine maintenance call that finished ahead of schedule, and there was that black truck parked right behind my wife's Subaru like it owned the place. I sat in my truck for a moment. Just sat there. My chest felt strange, like something heavy had been placed on it while I wasn't looking. I went inside. They were in the kitchen. Diane was leaning against the counter, and Brandon was standing close. Too close, the way people stand when they've stopped pretending. She saw me first. Her face went white. He turned around slowly, like a man who had decided somewhere between my driveway and my kitchen that he wasn't going to be nervous. He looked me up and down once. Then he smiled. "You must be the husband," he said. I looked at my wife. She had her arms crossed over her chest and she was staring at the floor. I had known this woman for 13 years. I had held her hand in the hospital when her father died. I had stayed up 3 nights in a row when Cooper had pneumonia at age 2. I had built a life with this person, tile by tile, year by year, and she was standing in my kitchen staring at my floor like I was the stranger. "Diane," I said, "who is this?" Brandon answered before she could. "I'm the reason she hasn't been happy in a long time," he said, "and I think it's time we all stopped pretending." I looked at him then, really looked at him. He had the confident posture of a man who had done this before, who had stood in other men's kitchens and said things like that and walked away without consequence. He had the look of someone who believed that size was a form of argument. "I think," I said, "you should leave my house." He laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, which almost made it worse. It was casual, dismissive. The laugh of a man who found me mildly amusing. "I don't think that's your call anymore," he said. And then he did something I still find difficult to describe. He stepped toward me, close enough that I had to tilt my chin up slightly to maintain eye contact, and he put one finger on my chest. Not a push, just a touch, The kind of touch designed to communicate without words that I was small and he was not. Diane's made her choice, he said. So why don't you be smart about this? My wife said nothing. I want you to understand something about that moment. I am not a small man, but I am not a large one either. I am 51 years old. I have bad knees from an old roofing job and a lower back that gives me trouble in cold weather. I could not have physically removed Brandon Holt from my home any more than I could have moved my truck with my hands. But I also knew something Brandon Holt did not know. I knew Clover Falls. I stepped back one step. I looked at Brandon. I looked at my wife. And then I did something that confused them both. I smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a nervous smile. Just a small, quiet smile. The kind that comes when a man who has been underestimated his entire life decides that today is the day he stops minding. Okay, I said. Diane blinked. Okay, I need some air, I said. I'll be back. I walked out of my own house, got into my truck, and I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Carol Hendricks, who had been practicing family law in Clover Falls for 26 years and who, when I told her what had just happened, said 7 words that I replayed for days afterward. Don't touch anything in that house. Good. The second was to my brother-in-law, Diane's older brother, Ray, who I had always gotten along with better than she deserved and who, when I told him what was happening, went very quiet and then said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. The third call was to a man named Gerald Purvis. Gerald was 63 years old, semi-retired, and had spent 30 years as the most well-connected real estate broker in 3 counties. He knew everyone. He had done business with everyone. He golfed with the bank managers and had coffee with the school board, and his wife ran the largest volunteer organization in the county. Gerald Purvis was not powerful in the way that Brandon Holt understood power. Gerald Purvis was powerful in the way that small towns actually work, through relationships, through trust, through the slow and patient accumulation of goodwill. Gerald was also my father's oldest friend. When I told him what had happened, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Son, you just sit tight and let me make a few calls. I sat in my truck outside the Dairy Queen on Route 9, and I ate a cheeseburger, and I waited. Over the next 72 hours, things began to move in ways I hadn't anticipated and didn't orchestrate. Gerald, as it turned out, knew the owner of the gym where Brandon worked, a man named Dale Forsyth, who ran a small chain of 3 fitness centers in the county and who took the professional conduct of his personal trainers very seriously, particularly when it came to clients. Gerald mentioned, over a Tuesday morning round of golf, that he'd heard something concerning about one of Dale's employees. Gerald didn't push. He didn't threaten. He simply mentioned. Dale looked into it himself. He found 3 other women, 3 other clients, who had similar stories about Brandon Holt. None of them had spoken up because none of them had thought anyone would listen. By Thursday, Brandon Holt no longer had a job. Meanwhile, Ray had gone home and told his mother. Diane's mother, Eleanor, was a 68-year-old retired school teacher who had very clear opinions about marriage and family and who had, apparently, a great deal more influence over her daughter than I had ever fully appreciated. I don't know exactly what was said in that conversation. I know it lasted 2 hours. I know that when it was over, Diane called me for the first time in 3 days, and she was crying. I didn't answer. Not because I was being cruel, because Carol had told me not to discuss anything without her present, and because I was finally, for the first time in months, operating from a position of clarity rather than shock. The clarity was this. I did not want to save my marriage. I had thought in those first numb hours that maybe I did. But sitting in that Dairy Queen parking lot, eating that cheeseburger, watching the ordinary life of Clover Falls move past the window, I realized that what I actually wanted was for my children to be okay. Everything else was secondary. Cooper and Maisie did not need their parents at war. They did not need a mother who had been publicly humiliated or a father who had been publicly victimized. They needed stability and routine and the knowledge that both of their parents were functional adults who could be in the same room at a school play. That was the goal. Everything I did afterward was in service of that goal. The divorce proceedings were, by most standards, civil. Carol was thorough and unsentimental, which was exactly what I needed. Diane hired her own attorney, a man from the next county who quickly discovered that Carol Hendricks in a deposition was not someone to take lightly. The settlement was fair. I kept the house. I had a son who played baseball in the backyard, and a daughter who had named 3 of the trees. And I was not going to uproot them. Diane got a reasonable financial arrangement and primary weekday custody during the school year, with the children spending weekends and summers with me. Diane never moved in with Brandon Holt. I found out, months later, that after losing his job, he had relocated to Nashville to pursue some vague aspiration involving fitness, influencing, and personal branding. The last I heard, he was managing a supplement store. I heard this from Gerald, who heard it from Dale Forsyth, who heard it from someone whose wife followed Brandon on Instagram and reported that his follower count had not recovered from some unspecified controversy. Small towns have long memories. There's something I want to tell you about the Saturday morning, 4 months after all of this, when I was standing at my kitchen counter making pancakes for Cooper and Maisie. It was October. The trees outside the window were doing what Tennessee trees do in October, putting on the kind of show that makes you understand why people use the word breathtaking without embarrassment. Cooper was at the kitchen table arguing that chocolate chips and pancakes should be mandatory, not optional. Maisie was feeding a piece of bacon to the dog, which she had been told not to do, and pretending she wasn't. I stood there with a spatula in my hand and I thought about Brandon Holt standing in my kitchen 5 months earlier, one finger on my chest and the absolute certainty in his face that he had won something. I thought about how much of power is just performance, how a man who fills up a room with his size and his confidence and his disregard for other people can seem, in a single moment, absolutely insurmountable. How that same man, removed from the context that gave him that power, the gym, the physique, the novelty, becomes ordinary. How ordinary, actually, is something he cannot survive. I thought about how I had walked out of my own house that day, and a lot of people watching from the outside might have read that as defeat. It wasn't defeat. It was calculation. I flipped the pancakes. "Dad," Cooper said, "you're burning them." "I'm not burning them, I'm caramelizing them." "That's not what caramelizing means." "How would you know?" "You're 10. He gave me the look that 10-year-old boys give their fathers when they believe they have won an argument, which is one of the better looks a person can receive. Maisie laughed. The dog barked. Outside, a pair of cardinals landed in the oak tree that my daughter had named Professor Treesworth, for reasons she had never adequately explained. I put the pancakes on the table. I sat down with my kids. Gerald came by later that afternoon, as he often did on Saturdays, ostensibly to drop off something, but actually just to sit on the porch for a while and talk about nothing in particular. He was that kind of friend, the kind who showed up without fanfare and stayed without agenda. My father had been the same way, and I had come to understand that this quality, this willingness to simply be present, was rarer and more valuable than almost anything else one person could offer another. We sat on the porch with coffee and watched the leaves. "How you doing, son?" he asked. "Good," I said, and I meant it. He nodded slowly, the way old men nod when they've lived long enough to know the difference between someone saying they're fine and someone saying they're fine. "You handled all this right," he said. "Your daddy would have said the same." I didn't say anything. I just looked at the oak tree and the cardinals and the long orange light of an October afternoon falling across my yard. Here's what I know now, that I didn't know the day Brandon Holt put his finger on my chest. The men who mistake loudness for strength and size for power are always eventually surprised by the world. Not because the world is just, it frequently isn't, but because that kind of power is borrowed. It has an expiration date. It depends on the cooperation of everyone around it, on people being too intimidated or too tired or too conflict-averse to push back. And the moment one person decides not to cooperate, the whole thing starts to come apart. I didn't fight Brandon Holt. I didn't need to. I just stopped cooperating. I stopped pretending that his presence in my kitchen gave him any actual authority. I stopped acting like his size was a logical argument. I stopped behaving like a man who had lost when, in fact, no outcome had been decided yet. I walked out of the house not in surrender, but in the clear-eyed recognition that the battlefield he had chosen, physical, immediate, theatrical, was not the one I intended to fight on. The battlefield I chose was quieter. It was a phone call to an attorney, and a conversation on a golf course, and a brother-in-law who drove 20 minutes because someone asked him to. It was years of being the ordinary, decent, present, reliable person in a small town where those things are actually noticed and remembered. It was a network built not through intimidation, but through consistency, through showing up, through being over and over again the kind of man that other people trusted. Brandon Holt came into my life like a storm. Fast, loud, destructive for a season. But storms pass, and what's left standing after the storm is the thing that was built to last. Cooper made first-string shortstop that spring. Maisie started piano lessons and has the natural talent for it that I completely lack. My business grew, added a fourth truck that fall, hired 2 more technicians. I started doing a half marathon every October with Ray, who turned out to be a better running partner than brother-in-law, and who apologized once quietly for his sister, and never brought it up again because that was the kind of man he was. Diane and I manage, as the attorneys promised we would. We sit at the same soccer games. We split holidays with a minimum of friction. She looks, most days, like a woman who is still finding her way through something. I don't feel satisfaction about that. I feel mostly nothing, which is its own kind of mercy. If you're the kind of man who fixes things with his hands, runs trucks and equipment, shows up early and stays late, and builds something real over years and decades. If you are the kind of man who gets mistaken for easy because you are calm, who gets mistaken for weak because you prefer to think before you speak, then you already know what I'm about to say. The ones who underestimate you are doing you a favor. Let them. Let them put their finger on your chest and smile and say you've lost like they know something you don't. Let them believe, right up until the moment the evidence disagrees with them, that the world belongs to whoever takes up the most space in a room. You know something they don't. You know who you've been for the last 11 years. You know the people who will pick up when you call. You know the difference between the loudness of a man at his peak and the quietness of a man with a plan. Walk out of the kitchen. Make your calls. Let the town remember. And when October comes and the light falls golden through the trees and your kids are arguing about pancakes at the breakfast table, you'll know. Not because you won some dramatic confrontation. Not because you stood up in the moment the way the movies would have you believe you should. You'll know because you are still here, in your house, with your children, in your yard, and the man who put his finger on your chest is managing a supplement store in Nashville. That's enough. More than enough. That right there is everything.